Good evening, everybody. My name is Sunit Kulkarni. I'm a back-end engineer, mostly by profession. I recently moved here to Miami about September of 2024, so relatively recent transplant down here. And I wanted to talk to you all about microservices development with a tool that I've really fallen in love with recently whenever I want to rapidly prototype new services. And specifically for microservices based backends. And how many is everybody here by any chance familiar with microservices backends? Anybody who's not? All right, cool. We'll get a little bit into that. So one of the reasons why you would want to develop a microservices type-based backend is to be able to break down business logic of a monolith. Allows you for you to independently scale up different pieces of business logic depending on how scaling needs go as you grow your company. So you may start off as a basic monolith as a start, but as you grow further and further and need to add more specialized engineers for developing different services, ideally a microservices type framework would allow you to do just that. And so let's say you have an e-commerce site, you may have many different domains. You may have a payments team. You may have a fraud team, as you just gave a nice view of that. That could be its own domain. You have an order flow domain and shipping domains and any part of business logic that needs to interact with each other, yet are their own separate departments, if you will. So you can kind of think of for every discrete point of logic you may have for business, put that into its own specialized service that can scale independently as time goes on. Let's see. And then, whoa, that's wrong. And then for me, whenever I develop microservices, I prefer to use Go myself. And out of a show of hands, who here uses Go day in and day out? Okay. Okay, cool, all right. Out of curiosity, well, what do you all use in the back-end world? Just shout it out of languages.
Rust, PHP. Yeah, Python. Rust and Ballerina.
Okay, I think I heard someone say TypeScript. Well, great news for you is while I'm referencing Go during this talk, Encore actually supports TypeScript as well. The Brace SDK is using Go, but it does support TypeScript now, and the team will eventually support Python in the near future. So for all the machine learning engineers out there, that is something to definitely look forward to. But the reason I've used it a lot is because, for one, Go is very fast. It allows you to use something called Go routines, which basically makes building any type of concurrent or parallel processes much easier. It's just simply putting a Go keyword and a function, and depending on the infrastructure of where your containers are deployed, it'll be able to run many things in parallel as And then, at least with Encore, it's actually pretty simple to get started. If you're on a Mac, you just simply do brew install Encore dev tap, and then whenever you create something, almost like a create React app, if you might go, you do Encore app or create, but you can always add this in later manually if you already have an existing repo, for example. Let's see, may have forgotten something there. Oh, and then I should also mention with Encore is, in addition to building out microservices, it actually has a lot of other built-in primitives right to go from the start. You get queues, for example, pub sub, and databases right built in. So that allows you as a developer to be able to build services out much more quickly without having to worry too much about plumbing. And the reason why I like that so much is Not quite, I wouldn't exactly call myself a pro at DevOps, so if anything else can be abstracted away where I can write an API and poof, go it to production, that's always a tool I love. And so, and in regards to building out services, Encore makes it really easy to be able to build different services, and then also being able to import them into one another without having to do too much on your end. Assuming you're in a monolith of sorts, and you've broken up your application into different folders, whereby each folder is its own microservice. Each one is defined as its own package, so in regards, let's say this is a hello package and this is, say, another ping package for whatnot. In that other folder, you simply import and you'll be able to call a method directly in another microservice. And Encore takes care of the networking and other magic behind the scenes very nicely. And let's see, where do I go here? And then the other great part about Encore here is you may notice right up here, I've defined Encore API public. This is actually how you define an API. If you've used any framework, say Express, for example, you have to do app use and define an endpoint there. You don't have to actually define where a router is. Just by simply writing a comment, oh, this is an API endpoint, that right there in the Encore runtime will be able to make a publicly accessible API. Now, right now that says public, but there's actually 3 different levels that are included. There's public, private, and what was the other one? Just forgot the last one. Public. Oh, public, private, and auth. So basically how that works, with public ones, just think any API with no authentication that the public can access, that's what that'd be for. But then if I change that to private, what that allows you to do is that only allows other microservices to call it. It cannot be accessible from the outside. The great thing about the Encore runtime, it handles that permissioning and networking under the hood for you. So that's a big plus for security. So say if you didn't want to expose a payments or a fraud API directly, and it can only be called by other permissioned services, that's a great way to keep security in mind as well. And then the other one where I mentioned auth, this would be, say, your protected routes. So I log in with Google or any other auth system you may have. That ensures that only signed-in users may be able to call said APIs. So just a matter of commenting, and you're ready to go on a REST API. Yep. Oh, and I already mentioned of how to import packages from each other, as long as the packages are right next to each other in folder structure. This is relatively easy to do. And where it says Encore app, that's where you can replace this with your GitHub repo, so github.com/organization and the repo, and then hello. So that's just simply a placeholder there. And so if you want to make importation easier, I recommend naming your Encore apps after the name of the Git repository that you're using. Then everything kind of works very nicely. And in developing and testing, which I'll show a demo soon after I get through this slideshow, has a very nice local development environment and UI whereby you'll be able to see UI to actually call APIs, to trace, and will actually generate infrastructure diagrams for you right on the fly. So anytime you may add another service, it'll draw another box with arrows dictating RPC methods of what's calling what. Oh, and that's one other thing I wanted to mention, is when you're actually importing APIs and having one call from each other, what this is actually doing under the hood, it's actually using gRPC under the hood for microservices communication. And before I go further there, who's here is familiar with gRPC APIs? Okay, cool, fairly enough. And for those who haven't yet worked with that, basically to put it a little bit more simply, is for with REST APIs, you most likely have used JSON or XML to send payloads back and forth. With a gRPC API, you're using something called protocol buffers. So instead of sending human-readable payloads back and forth, you basically take that data and you encode it in binary and then send that back and forth. And the advantage of that is the data load that you have to send back is much more reduced. So on your average JSON payload, if you convert that to a protocol buffer payload, you're saving somewhere on the order of 30 to 40% in just data having to be sent back of the equivalent.
How do you debug that?
Oh, how you debug this? Well, cool thing with Encore is with the RPC services coming through, that you'll be able to do right within the framework and UI that it shows. But if you're wondering, let's say you didn't have Encore, you can't adopt it right away. There is a few other API tooling out there that allows you to do this. With Postman now supports using gRPC APIs. You probably use it for HTTP APIs and GraphQL ones, perhaps, or even WebSocket. It now supports gRPC. Yes?
So, like the way I've used gRPC is you start with proto and you like
Yep.
do code gen. But in this case, you're like in your previous slide, you were showing that you define your types already.
Yep.
You put out the types as well. So, how
Yep.
does
So,
that go from?
yeah, the cool thing about Encore is when you're defining these service structs over here, that's actually going to create its own protos behind the scene. Exactly. Exactly. And the cool thing for all inter-service communication, you don't have to worry about that. It's doing that for you. Maybe for another talk, I'll.
Like reflection?
Uh,
Like some sort of reflection on site?
I have to double check if it's actually using true reflection under the hood when it's doing inter-service communication. But yes, sir.
Yeah, so I don't use Go. I'm not sure what like the number type looks like, for example. But gRPC lets you control the precision, for example, right?
Yep.
How when this gets ported to TypeScript, for example, how does that typing conversion work? Because gRPC is very strictly typed.
I haven't actually toyed around too much with the TypeScript versioning of this, but it's a good question.
Is there one-to-one alignment between the Go types and
Yes.
gRPC?
Yes. Yep. Although actually in another public, which actually gives me an idea for another next talk, maybe I'll show you how to make it even easier working with publicly accessible gRPC APIs. This is just the benefit you get as working with the Encore framework out of the box. Any other questions on that? This is a great discussion.
I had my question. You first. Hi. So no, just you have commented Encore API public. Does that generate like the open API?
Yes, it does.
All right.
I'm gonna show you a little real quick demo that will actually expose that for you. You can call it right in a UI. That is correct.
Does the Encore framework allow you to like plug and play like both Go and TypeScript?
So look at,
services, or
you mean in the same repo?
like in the same infrastructure.
Yes. Now I think as looking at through the Discord chat, I know that feature's coming where right in the same repo you can have some written in TypeScript and some written in Go, and they'll be able to communicate with each other. If you want to do that right now, you have to have two separate Git repos, but soon enough you will.
You deploy them to the same infrastructure.
Yeah. This once you have this deployed, this can interact with anything you like.
Kind of more like, is it not to kind of
Please ask.
of like, does Encore assume that like all the services are on the same, like how do I describe this? Basically all on the same network, or do you have like multiple overlay networks and you want to like address between them?
So at least when, this is in another slide, but let's say when you deploy this to the cloud, it's going to use cloud native, built-in cloud services. So for example,
I saw you.
Yeah. So
Deploy to Kubernetes and then deploy to Kubernetes.
yeah, exactly. Actually, I think that might be my next slide. Is it? Oh yeah. Actually, wait. That's perfect. I just didn't mouse that over. So yeah, no, that's a good question. So depending on your scale, since this is for every service, it's going to generate its own Docker container. So let's say you don't need too much scale right now. You can actually deploy it to a Kubernetes cluster right in AWS or GCP, or to ECS in AWS and Cloud Run in GKE. And so from there, the Encore runtime will deploy the proper networking between them. But yeah, if you wanted a lot of scale, right in a Kubernetes cluster. Yes.
So what I'm getting from that is that like AWS and these cloud providers have their own built-in Encore service
No. So no. Encore is actually its own open source framework that lives outside of the cloud providers, but they have within their runtime. They've predefined when you deploy. Oh, if you're on AWS, use this service. Use this service to spin up. Uh, Use it in this case ECS or EKS to spin up the microservices containers, and then say for a database, it'll spin up. Last I checked on AWS, an RDS cluster for a database. So yeah, whatever primitives you have. So let's say if you want to use the Encore pub sub queue, when it comes time to deploy to AWS, that's going to tell AWS, oh hey, provision me an SQS queue, or if it's for GCP, it's going to say, oh, provision me a pub sub queue. And the great part is here, you don't have to worry about Terraform deployments. Whether the Encore runtime will generate that for you. And then for other service primitives that Encore doesn't support, so let's say I need to use AWS IoT, for example, that's not supported here. There is a Terraform provider that allow you to expose what has already been deployed by Encore to then have any other infrastructure point to that, so that your DevOps guys can be happy. Yes?
So under the hood, is Encore literally just calling the AWS APIs to spin up the services, or is it using some type of persistence, not Terraform, but for AWS like Cloud Formation?
No, yeah, actually, it would be calling the APIs directly, and how they make money, even though it's an open source company, is they have a managed cloud offering and DevOps you pay by the resource for managing. But did that answer the question? Cool. Any other questions? Keep it coming. All right, next. Oh, all good. All good. No, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, didn't have to really refer to my teleprompter too much actually. So this has been amazing. Let's see, deployment option. Yeah, best practices over here. I recommend for services, just name. So let's say you have a payment service underscore, and then you have to do this anyway, just from the syntax of Go. And for exposing functions, those all have to be capitalized to be importable as well as exposable via API. And then also for any sensitive data you may have, so credit cards or fraud type ones, you can indicate that's sensitive. So within the trace logs that I'm going to quickly show soon enough, it won't actually show up there. So security is built in right from the start. And then so yeah, the conclusion there is Encore's pretty awesome. Highly recommend you guys try it out, and it can be adopted very incrementally. Yep.
Just curious, like the extra resources that it seems like come with Encore, like caching and
Yep.
the queuing and the yada yada, interchangeable, or like is there one Encore like interface for talking to a queue, and then you can just like swap out?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's exactly. So yeah, you'll have the concept of an Encore.
Adapters.
Yep, you'll have the concept of an Encore queue, for example. But if you wanted to, exactly, then with that interface, if you're deploying to AWS, you're using the AWS primitive for that. For GCP, you're using the GCP version. And hey, since this is open source, you can self-host this or go on DigitalOcean. However, once you do that, you have to tell the Encore framework, we're pointing to this resource in the cloud.
So like the lock-in is with using the Encore interface.
Yes.
To speak to the
Exactly.
queue, and then
Yep, exactly. So you'd have a NATS queue or whatnot, and then that you can customize, go furthermore, say, for my database, actually I want you to point to this this database endpoint rather than what it may do by default. But the second you start doing that, that's where it gets a little bit more DevOpsy, but this gives a lot of batteries included by default. Yes.
Is there a specific, like, I guess, workflow or cloud provider that you prefer working with? Like, is there maybe benefits to either DigitalOcean or?
Well, actually, that's a good question, yes. So actually, another way Encore is making money is when you deploy, you can actually let them handle the deployments, and they'll deploy in their own cloud environment, and they'll just expose an endpoint, which is like encore.dev, and then your endpoints will be exposable that way. Now, that's not really meant for production use. Those are best for preview environments. The second you want to go production, pick one of the cloud environments. Right now, it has the best support for AWS and GCP right out of the box. Once you go beyond that, then you have to tool it a little bit more yourself. Then you have to manage the Docker containers yourself. Yes.
So my question is about the protocol buffer representation again. So
Yep.
typically for a larger protocol buffer project, right, if you have a type in the spec and you add a new field, right, generally it's best practice, at least for some of these cases, right, to not remove the old field, you append old, right? So for something like this, do you persist the protocol buffer? It's a two-part question, right? Number one is, do you persist the protocol buffer from the tool in your repository so that it tracks changes? And if not, how does it track the changes if I like go into my type and change a variable or whatever, right? Because that would break in a rolling deployment context, right? Because like all the old sort of, it's protocol buffer, right? It has to align perfectly when it blows up. So
Yeah.
how does that?
Well, this is more of the internal mechanics. Now, I mean, are you dealing with publicly accessible protobuf APIs, or is?
Right? If you have a Kubernetes cluster,
Yep.
with 100 microservices, right? And the 100 microservices are all expressed in Encore.
Yep.
Right? If I change one and then I have a rolling deploy for a bunch of clusters, right? There will be a scenario where 20% of my pods are updated, right? In which case the interchange format that this 20% and the other 80% are using are different. So how does it?
Oh, okay. So under this assumption, let's say you had all those 100 microservices deployed in Encore, for example. The second you changed a contract, for that matter, well, all the other microservices that are calling that new changed microservice, if you don't change them as well, the runtime will be, I cannot compile this because you didn't update the calls from the other ones. So that's how you would deal with that.
Or it would just be like as you're rolling deploy, I guess the request would be tracked in Kubernetes as well.
I think there's a misunderstanding there. So I'm not talking about the update within the application, right? I'm saying that goes fine if updating all the services or whatever. I'm talking about the deployment to the infrastructure, right? So you have version 1 running.
Yep.
And you roll in version 2, right? That, assume you have a progressive deployment, right? So you have some version 2 containers running alongside some version 1 containers. Because the protobuf is generated off the types directly, and if it's not doing some, frankly, very complex tracking of, hey, I saw this earlier, I need to deprecate it, it's not here, how does it reconcile?
I haven't played too much in depth with the actual DevOps tooling. This is actually where the Encore Cloud.
Cool, thank you.
No worries. Yes.
So my question is like, how does Encore help with testing, like regression testing, upstream, downstream? Like as you create more and more microservices, you make a change, how you know it's not going to break something else?
Oh, it does actually static analysis whenever you do Encore run or compile. So the second, let's say you didn't update your, as I was alluding to the previous example, if you update a function call one way, but somewhere else should call it and you didn't update, it'll actually, when you try to do Encore run to deploy it, it'll just say, oh, sorry, this cannot run, and it will point you right towards that. And then you can write unit tests just as you always do. And the great part is, because with Encore the runtime, it makes integration testing a little bit easier in regards to services calling each other, and then it can integrate into whatever test flow you may have at the moment. Was there one you had in mind?
No, so like my question more general, like you gave me another question. Can you do can you figure out how much code coverage you have across all microservices?
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Actually, let's see if
Say you have a service.go file that defines your microservice. How you would test it is right next to, in the exact same service folder. You do a service _ test go to do all your coverage there. That's how that's how you would run that in that case. Make sure the test file is sitting right next to the original file.
Got it.
Yes.
Yeah, I have like multiple questions. First, I didn't get what exact problem were solved. So let's say if I'm a small project, I most likely don't need microservices. And if I'm big enterprise, I most likely, if I use microservices, already manage it somehow. So for what audience is this? And what exact problem of management cluster or like writing microservices it solves?
Allows you to build, if I just put it simply, allows you to build back.
Too much knowledge of DevOps right from the start. So whether if you're a large enterprise but you want to maybe greenfield something new, you can spin this up really quickly. Or you say you already had a microservices-based infrastructure already, you can actually phase this framework in and out. And the great news here is it actually has built-in tracing for you, because one of the big issues with microservices is debugging and tracing across a bunch of services. But the Encore runtime actually has all that built in right from the get-go. So it just makes developer happiness in that regard a lot nicer.
In case if I have multiple microservices, one of which is like Go, one of which is Python, third one is TypeScript, I will lose my tracing if just Go part is managed by this. Am I understanding correct?
Well, actually, let's say if say you had a Datadog tracer already in all your microservices there, you can actually write in the configuration here, plug that in so you wouldn't lose your tracing, even though only the Go or TypeScript part was managed by Encore. So you can adopt this with slowly phase in. You don't have to go all in all at once.
Okay, and separate question I have. So you mentioned you have like three types of like API.
Yep.
Public, private, and something I didn't hear.
Public, public, private, and auth, AUTH.
Oh. So here, yeah, that was my question. So for private, you said like all services has access to this one. And what was for, let's say if I have like, it's kind of common pattern for mutual TLS to have like only, let's say if I have payment, I have access only from service A and service B, and everything else is denied. And I definitely need like their certificate. So how this one stuff is set up and in what level? Because it's usually not done on level of kind of.
Right, yeah. So at least for over here, if you want to restrict it to only service A, you call service B, and B is, let's say, the private one. So with the Encore runtime static analysis that does under the hood, say A, B is the private one, and A is going to call it. As long as in the code you've only set it up where only the A service is ever calling the B service and no other service.
On deployment, it will restrict it to only the A service calling set of B service.
I didn't get to like code level, like control that, or some kind of similar like comments or what?
It's a middleware, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah, there's a concept in Encore called the auth handler. So let's say, so that was at least private, meaning only other microservices can call it, and only the ones that are actually calling the service will ever have access to it. But let's say you set up Google sign-in auth, for example. If you were to put the auth keyword there, that means only those who signed in with your system's authentication mechanism would be able to call that API. So it's this would become a protected route.
So it's like general. So
Yes, exactly.
Like
Exactly.
No way to inject particular then I all except this one. I mean, if let's say any random user cannot access my service in any way except like service A that is, I don't know, it postman dot to my service. I don't know why, but and it has specific certificate and it can authenticate to this particular service. So I assume.
Actually, with here, I actually haven't looked that too deep in, but you don't have to worry about MTLS certs with the Encore framework, at least with services calling each other.
Oh.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, never mind. Cool. Actually, and if you want, I can show a real quick 30-second demo of what of that UI was mentioning before.
So Encore, the MVC framework, or is it a different type of framework?
Encore.dev.
Is it MVC framework or model view controller?
No, it's more for you want to build out back end things. But yeah, actually, so here's an example of just a simple link shortener app. Right, cool. When you use Encore, you get access to a UI right over here at port 9400. And so, for example, let's say I want to shorten a random URL. This is the other cool thing about it here is you don't have to use Postman separately. It actually has a built-in API caller right inside of the UI, and that is built out through defining those APIs as I showed before, where it generates an open API spec on the fly right there, which allows you to call stuff like here. So let's say if I shorten, let's do TechCrunch. And from over there, cool, creates a slug right over there. And then, let's say I want to go and get that, for example. It knows that this was a parameterized input, so you can just paste that right there. And there we go, and get a successful call right back there. And then the tracing I was mentioning before, as you can see, every time you hit any Encore service, it's going to keep a record of the API calls that you've hit. So for example, say I go to the URL get, it'll have a flame graph right over here. Now this is very simple. It's just only one service being called. But if it's many calls that are happening, it's going to show you that entire chronological history from the get-go. Yes?
Just the Encore console.
Yep, exactly.
And tracing is open telemetry.
Yeah. Yes, and you can plug in your Datadog or any other third-party provider you want into this, but you get batteries included from the get-go because debugging microservices can be quite a pain, but the great thing about Encore is it makes it a hell of a lot easier.
If I deploy this on AWS, who stores the traces?
Should be, probably should look that in, but it should stay inside your AWS environment, or if you're exposing it, if you use the Datadog plugin, then you'll see it inside your Datadog console.
So this is just like debug mode, it's not for production, like, because of concern on PII data leaks and stuff.
Yeah, you wouldn't see this in prod, but for development purposes, this is the best part. I mean, since you mentioned testing, like, hey, where do I go? This is right here. Oh, and this is also the, where'd the infrastructure go? Yeah, here's an example of a flow diagram. Right now, it's just only one microservice, but the second you have many more microservices, it'll auto-generate more boxes with more arrows of what's calling what.
Yeah, 'cause I do it at work, I deal with like 40 microservices.
Yep, you'd be able to end it if you probably, if you're trying to keep that up to date in something like Draw.io or whatever it is you use, you don't have to worry about that. This will
that'll be nice.
keep it up to date
That's
right from whenever you change it.
But do all the apps need to be written in Go or no?
Go in TypeScript for now, and soon Python.
Got it, yeah. Unfortunately, we can't use that. We have Python and we have PHP. And then like we use something called Apex, so I don't know if that would even work, but no, I wish we had something like this. It would make all of our lives easier.
Well, hopefully later this year the Python one will be ready and you can certainly experiment with that. All right.